Hi, Paulie here. So, back in the early 90s, I was over in the UK, and while I was staying in Britain, I'd met up with some local role-playing gamers, and they brought out their game of choice, the classic game, the game everyone played. And I have been involved with role-playing games since they started. I had never heard of this thing, and I played it, and it was amazing. And that game is a very, very British role-playing game called Dragon Warriors. It's an absolute classic, and it deserves to be remembered with a lot more love, particularly now that it's come out in a new edition, which I want to have a look at. So, Dragon Warriors, ta-da! This is the new edition which is out. You can get it on drive-through. Comes in soft cover. I like the hardcovers because they are magnificent. This is fantastic. Look, I was doing a lot of game design and so on in my early 20s and teen years. I was messing about. I kind of like to think that if I was like 1920, this is sort of the game I would have come up with way back then. We loved the Geist of D&D, but we moved on to things like RuneQuest because it was a little bit more visceral. It was more accurate. The combat felt better, but mostly your character's skills came into play and sort of preserved you. Dragon Warriors keeps the simplicity of a Dungeons and Dragons style system, but it brings in some things that D&D sorely missed. And as far as combat goes, the thing that drove me insane with Dungeons and Dragons was the fact that no matter how skilled you were just as easy to hit as a total novice. What mattered was the armor you were wearing, but the most skilled swordsman in the history of the entire universe is exactly as easy to land a shot on as, you know, a peasant just standing in the road staring off at the daisies. So, this little game, it's got the expected sort of spread of characteristics and so on, but the neat thing is it's English designed, and they wanted way more of a grip on the setting. So it's a low magic sort of setting. It's very, very medieval. It's, if you could imagine, around about sort of 1410. So longbows, there's some plate armor and so on, crossbows, but the feudal economics are there. The cities, the systems. There's none of the anachronisms that flood D&D. There's no out of place ships. There's no strange, magical stuff that we just excuse, and there's no mysterious appearance of indoor plumbing. This is the Middle Ages. So as a character you can choose sort of knightly sorts, you can choose barbarian sorts, which means outside of that feudal system. So if you were like a Scottish Highland warrior, or if you were the equivalent of a Mongol, or if you were someone from the deserts, or you were some of the hill people from the equivalent of Spain and so on. It's a fighter sort that's not the heavy armor and sword wielding types. There's also magic users, of course. Magic is looked on with a certain amount of suspicion. It's not quite, burn the witch, but you have to be careful because some of the spells that are cast really are like old curses and so on, and you could wreak some havoc with them. The magic's very mysterious. It's not something that you just throw around the way you do in Dungeons and Dragons. It's got a darker, way more medieval geist to it. There are also some magic using characters that turn that magic inwards to enhance themselves, so they become like magically enhanced fighters. These adept characters are, that's a very interesting thing to take. And there's the thiefy, assassiny sorts as well that operate off strength. They brought out a player's guide, which tells players all they need to know to get your characters and so on done. There's main rules themselves, absolutely essential. Also some expansions like a bestiary, which has a ton more very, very, very interesting creatures. And they brought out a book of pre-done characters, friends and foes and so on, potential allies and potential enemies, all with stories attached, so great to run. They also brought out a ton of adventures. And because of that very medieval European setting, you've got like haunted Roman legions and some really lovely mysterious kind of Celtic spirits. So what I liked about this was your characters have an attack value, which is how good they are at fighting. You also have a defense value, which is how good you are at defending yourself, which will vary obviously according to your training and class. But also, as you gain experience, it becomes easier for you to hit things, but you defend yourself better. The same works magically. Now, this is still a game from early period, so for some reason there are two systems that work concurrently. Combat works on a d20 to hit. For some reason, skills are rolled on 2d10. However, they do say, if you want, roll the 2d10 for combat. It gives a bell curve, so you haven't got quite as many depressing misses and wacky hits. You tend to get the average. So that was there. So there are two types of dice systems that work if you don't want to take that option. Weapons and so on, very interesting. So what you've got is your weapons are actually rated for the damage they do, but they also have a dice that they roll for how well they defeat armor. The armor has a value that you've got to equal or exceed on those dice. So a sword, pretty good damage. It's okay at defeating armor, but there are armor defeating things like maces, picks, hammers and so on. May not do as much damage, but they're really good at getting past those armors. So, exactly what you got medievally. A knight's going to have his warhammer or his axe or his flanged mace or something, and this is the thing he's going to use in melee against guys who are in play. Preferential to use the sword against the lower armored guys. A nice spread of armor and weapons there. Some spectacularly nice spell grimoires, and what they've done is they've set up an entire world for you. Comes in the book, complete with some beginning adventures, and the world is analogous to medieval Europe. There's a place that's kind of Britain, a place that's kind of France. There is places that are analogous to the Mongol steppes, to different caliphates and so on. They've written all these up so that you can actually travel far off to strange and haunted places. What I love about this one is that things like monsters and so on, they're not quite so cookie cutter as Dungeons and Dragons. It's a British game, so they still want you to kind of get in there and beat the snot out of things. But a lot of the monsters are a lot creepier than you would find in, say, Dungeons and Dragons. The undead things are often created by a curse. They're not something that goes away readily. Some of the more powerful ones, you have to actually figure them out. They're a conundrum. This thing's here for a reason. It's going to return and constantly be a dread source of terror to this region. It'll steal the souls of the firstborn, or it will make all the cattle mislay eggs, until you find out where it was buried, what injustice was done that created this thing. And some of these things are quite frightening, fell spirits from previous times. There's lots of the usual kind of medieval monsters. There's manticores and skeletons and these sorts of things. Some of them have a really nice take to them. They're more complex and more in line with medieval legends than I think some of the D&D ones were. So they're a bit more challenging, particularly if players come sweeping in and don't think. So look, this is a lost classic. It's as easy to get into as the earlier Dungeons and Dragons. There isn't a massive rules to read. You can pick it up and start playing. The characters, however, are I think that defense and I think the armor, defeat rolls and so on are a really interesting extra dimension that D&D missed. So look, this is a great classic. It's back. These guys, Serpent King, have picked up the license. These are the original books cleaned up and reprinted with some spectacular new art in them. The originals are actually brought out as little corgi paperbacks, and they're worth a ton if you can find them. But masses of material out for this. Hopefully they're going to bring out a lot more. It's a lost classic that is actually been brought back to us now. We can play it, and I think you should give it a go. It really does deserve to be ranked up there amongst the great classics of the hobby. Drive through rpg.com, look it up, and give it a go. Really, 5-star game. Snoots approved.